Hey folks, it's Tom, your Frugal Prepper. How's it going? So I have been wanting to redo my, or not redo, but add to my video series on canning. So what this is going to be, we're going to make some pickles. We're going to actually do some water bath canning. Had a couple videos before as part of that series that just were basically some introductory information and some of the truths and myths about botulism. And so now we're going to actually do some canning today. And what I'm going to show you is that you can get started canning for a very small amount of money. A lot of people think that you have to buy all this equipment to can. So what we're going to be doing today is called water bath canning. And this is where we have a high acid content in the food, so we don't need a pressure canner. You can do a lot with water bath canning. There are, like for beans, you have dilly beans, you have pickles, relishes, all kinds of sauces that are based on tomatoes, that kind of stuff, salsa. So there's a lot of approved recipes. I'll put a link down below to the NCFP website where you can get their little canning book for free. It's a free download. It has a lot of good recipes in there. If you want to buy something, the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving or the Ball Blue Book, or one of my favorite books is called Putting Food By. I'll put some links to those below as well. So here's the things that you're going to need. There's other things that are great to have, but we're not going to use them today because I'm going to show you how to do this on the cheap. If you just want to get started canning, see if it's something you like to do, see if it's worth the time that it takes to you, then you can make some pickles. I'm using these little cucumbers. These are from Boston Pickling Cucumber Plants. You plant a few of these plants in your garden and you will have plenty probably to make pickles for sandwiches and that kind of stuff for a year easily. Depends on how many pickles you eat, I guess, but these plants are prolific. They grow really well. So what I do is I just have like 2 plants, and I just collect the cucumbers and put them in a big Ziploc bag, and I moisten a paper towel and stick it down in here. And that keeps these nice and humidified, and you can keep these in the fridge for a couple weeks and they'll stay nice and fresh for you that way. And then I have some that I just picked fresh from the garden today. So you can buy some cucumbers to try this out too. And what we're going to be doing is the Mrs. Wages. Now they make just a dill pickle mix is fine. I have this one that's kosher dill pickles, which you could use like small whole pickles with, but you can slice them up and use this. And honestly, they taste about the same to me. These are kind of expensive if you buy them at normal price. They might be like $4 or $5, but as you can see, if you look on the clearance carts at the end of canning season before winter, October, November-ish, these will all go on sale. This one was 75 cents. But I've seen them for 50 cents, and you can save them. You can see I have the 13 on this one. That's because this one was from 2013. It's next to the last one I have to use up, and then I have my 2014 ones. These stay good forever. They get hard down here because of the salt and stuff that's in them, but once you put them in the pan, they'll just dissolve right away, and these will work fine. But make sure your packages aren't torn up or anything like that or open. And I just keep them in a big plastic tub with a lid in the basement. So I like these because they're an approved recipe. They have the salt and everything already in them. You just add vinegar and water. So you're also going to need a large like stock pot. I think this is one I got at my local Odd Lots or Big Lots or whatever. It was $5. It had a lid at one time, which has been lost. But you just need something to cover it with. I have this lid that's from a garage sale or something that will fit well enough over the top. And you don't have to cover it, but you're going to have a whole lot less steam and humidity in your kitchen if you put something over it while it's boiling and processing. You're also going to need some towels. So a canning rack is great if you have one to fit in the bottom of your pan, but you just need to keep your jars from touching the bottom. So you can just take and, you know, stick this down in the bottom of the pan so that your jars can sit on it. And you'll just fill it up with water and they'll boil with the towel in there. And that's really all you need. The towel's not going to burn or anything because it's sitting in water. Gonna need some canning jars. You know, this is a leftover salsa jar that's a standard mason type jar on the top. That's gonna work just fine. And you'll also need some rings and lids for your jars. The rings are reusable, the lids are not. So you can pick these jars up at garage sales and stuff. You know, this is your standard ball canning jar, but Kerr, you have some of the older brands were the Lamb and the Atlas, and those will work fine. You also have Golden Harvest jars that you can get at like Family Dollar. You can buy new ones if you want. If you're just trying it out though, I find some of these at a thrift store or a garage sale. And then I like to have a nice ladle. Plastic ladle is fine. Just one happens to be a stainless steel one, but you can just go get a cheap ladle at the dollar store for $1 or $2 and you'll be set. You're going to need some type of a large pan to go ahead and make your pickle mix in, your brine, which is what you're going to make with this package. So just have a large pan. This is going to take, let's see here, 3.5 cups of distilled vinegar and 7 1/3 cups of water. So you're gonna need some white distilled vinegar. This was from Family Dollar for like $1.70, and this has to be 5% acidity, and that's fine. I think apple cider vinegar, as long as it's the right acidity, would work, but it might taste a little weird for pickles. I think it's great in salsa, but just get you some vinegar. Now this recipe includes the salt, but one thing I was just going to point out is you do have a recipe and it calls for salt. You want to get pickling salt or canning salt. It doesn't have the additives. Your standard table salt, yes, you can use it, but it's going to make your jars cloudy. And so it won't look as pretty, and then you always have to say, is it cloudy because of the salt, or is it cloudy because something's growing in there? So don't use this if you have a recipe that needs it. Just get you a small thing of cannling and pickling salt. You can get it at just about any grocery store. So the other thing I want to say is, you know, if you've canned with your grandma before, you probably went through sterilizing your jars, lids, rings, all that. You don't need to do that anymore. All you need to do is wash these in really good hot soapy dishwater, and that's all that they require anymore. Now if you're using some type of semi-questionable water supply in a grid down situation, then by all means boil and sterilize the heck out of everything. But standard water, I'm on city water, so it's chlorinated, it's going to be fine. Most well waters are tested to be perfectly potable and fine. You should just be able to wash these in good hot soapy water, and that's going to be perfectly good enough. So you don't have to waste your time trying to boil all your jars and utensils and all that kind of stuff. So now another thing that you might want is some type of a plastic or wood skewer stick that you can kind of poke down in here and debubble. I'll show you that. I use a butter knife. A lot of people will say, oh, don't ever let metal touch your jars. It's going to ruin them. It's going to scratch them and then they're going to crack. That's not why these jars crack. The jars will crack because of thermal shock. You got to make sure that when you put the hot pickling brine in this jar and then you put it in the canner and add the water, you know, you've got to have the water warm as well. You can't have too much of a temperature difference there, and if you do, it's going to crack the jar. The other thing is if you put the lids on way too tight, the pressure will build up in the jar, and it's normally the bottom of the jar that will blow out. So we'll go through all that as we're doing the process here. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get started washing up the jars and getting everything ready. And then we're going to get a cutting board and a knife. You're going to need those too. And we're going to slice the pickles with the cucumbers. And then, you know, the other thing you probably want for this is some type of a large plastic bowl or a couple of smaller ones just to hold these like as you cut them up. This is stuff that most people have around. So we'll go ahead and go over here to the sink and get some of these jars washed up. Okay, so what I've got is just a nice kind of hot, soapy, you know, water mixture over here with some blue dish soap. I'm sorry that over the sink light just decided to die here, so we'll do as good as we can. I'm going to put my rings in here. I'm going to take my lids as well. I'm going to wash them up. So these are just your standard ball canning lids. We're just going to put those in the water, and we're going to get our jars. Here, I'm just going to get 5 of these jars. Put them down here in this water. Wash them up as well. And I'm just going to take a little brush here, you know, and just scrub down inside the jar real good. Even if it looks clean, just scrub the whole thing out real good. You do want these to be clean. Botulism, of course, won't grow in a jar because it's acidic. It's too acidic. But molds and spores and yeast, there are certain ones that can. So we're processing them for enough time to kill them, but there's such a thing as a bacterial load, and if that bacterial load's too high because you didn't start with clean stuff, then some could escape the sterilization process, you know, when we boil it. So I'll just rinse it off with some clean water, and we'll just do that and repeat the rings. I'm just going to go in and scrub the grooves out on those real good. It's okay if they're a little rusty, that won't hurt a thing. They do rust over time. And as far as the lids, you know, just basically kind of the same exact thing. Just scrub it lightly to make sure it's clean and rinse it. So I'll do that on the rest of these jars, and then we'll get started slicing some cucumbers. Alright, so now I have all the jars washed up here, and the rings and the lids. And what I'll do is just go ahead and give my cutting board and knife a final wash, and then we'll slice cucumbers. I just sit them on a towel here, and then when I get ready to fill them up, and this towel will double when we pull them out. We'll want to sit them on a towel when they're hot, just so that the temperature changes slowly. Okay, so I've also washed my pan and my ladle one final time here, just to make sure we're good and clean. So what we want to do now is go ahead and just follow the directions on the back of the packet, prepare and wash all the canning jars and stuff. That's all been done. Wash the cucumbers, remove any blossoms. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and get this brine started so I can be kind of coming to a boil while I'm getting the cucumbers and everything ready. So we're going to combine the kosher dill mix, vinegar and water into a large pan, and don't use aluminum. This is stainless steel. Aluminum is really an acidic mix. It can change the flavor if you use aluminum. And then we're just going to bring it to a boil. So what we want is 3.5 cups. So just to let you know, most canning jars, if you don't have a measuring cup, have the ounces right on the side. And it even gives you like what a cup is. So it's a 16-ounce jar, 8 ounces is a cup. So if you in a pinch, you can use that. I'm just going to use a measuring cup because I have one. But we'll go ahead and put our pickle mix in there. Then I will grab that. You can see like it's kind of in clumps here just because it's older. That will all dissolve, so you don't have to worry about that. So I'm just going to grab a measuring cup. Most people have some type of measuring cup, but if you don't, use the jar. It'll work perfectly fine. So, I think it's what, 7 1/3 cups of water. So, we'll get that done. 2, 4, 6, and there's another 1 1/3. So now we got to add the vinegar. And so the vinegar on here is 3 1/3 cups. There's 2 cups. And 1 1/3 cups. So now we'll go ahead and turn our flame on nice and low here. If I get the right burner. And we'll have to stir this every once in a while and make sure that everything is dissolved. It's going to feel kind of gritty at the bottom of the pan. That's just all the salt and stuff. That's going to all dissolve in here as it warms up. Smells delicious. And the other thing is it's going to look kind of red. Like that doesn't not, let me show you. That does not look like pickles mix. As it heats up, it's going to turn green. So don't worry about that. So now we'll go over here and we'll get these cucumbers done. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just wash these cucumbers off real good. Make sure there's none of those little spiky things left on them. And just scrub them lightly with the brush. Just to make sure that they're clean. And I'll just put them in my bowl here. Get these all cleaned off real good. We just want to make sure there's no dirt or anything on them before we can them. Make sure your blossoms are all off the end, that kind of thing. So I'll get these done and then I will be back. Alright, so now all we gotta do is just slice up our cucumbers. Now if you want a more crispy cucumber, come back off of this blossom end like about yay far. Cut a nice chunk of the end where the blossom was. You know, you have your stem end and your blossom end. That'll help. I don't care because these are just going to be sandwich slices. So I'm going to use as much of the cucumber as I can. And I'll just cut off a small piece on the end. And I'll cut off the small piece on the stem end. And then we're just going to slice them up. And you can make them pretty much as thick or as thin as you want. I like them just a little bit thicker. That's the nice thing about making your own pickles is you can kind of make them the way you like them. You see these cucumbers that are a little bigger, have a little more seeds in them. That's fine. They're smaller. They'll have like little to no seeds at all. So however you like them. The problem is these are so productive and fast growing that they can be tiny one day and you go out the next day and they're huge. So it can be kind of hard to get them picked at just the right time. Now I'll just take these and put them in this other bowl here. And I'll slice a couple more of them up and then I'll show you how we're going to pack the jars. Okay, so I've sliced up most of the cucumbers. I've left a few over here in reserve. I just want to fill up the jars and get about 5 jars worth. I don't want to end up with a whole bunch of extra sliced cucumbers So I'm just doing this 5-jar batch. And you just basically pack your cucumbers in here. You want to pack them in really tight and try to fill up all of your little air gaps as much as you can. You really get them down in here. Really push them in. If you don't, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of pickles floating on the top with a bunch of fluid underneath. So you really need to get these in here packed tight. And so that's a packed jar. We'll go ahead and pack the rest of these jars. Okay, so alright, so you see we got our pickles all processed. Now we want to fill these jars with the pickling brine to 1/2 inch headspace. So your 1/2 inch headspace, where this thread for the ring is, where that thread starts at the bottom, right here, is where you want to fill it to, just to the bottom of that. That's a 1/2 inch. You might have a canning funnel. Those are handy. You don't need one. Just be careful not to spill the brine with your ladle. And all we're going to do is go ahead and just fill these jars with the pickling brine. And what I'll do is I won't fill them to exact headspace because we're going to bubble them before we do the final top off. I have some extra brine left over. That recipe actually makes 7 quarts, so I'm doing 5 pints. So we'll have some extra, and what you can do with your extra is just put it in a bowl and put it in the freezer. Now it won't freeze solid because it's got so much salt in it, but it will stay good until you're ready to do some more pickles. So what we can do now is go ahead and get a butter knife here. And I just want to come down in here and work these air bubbles out. I'll kind of just stick it down in the middle here and kind of slide it down in here. Make sure we don't have a bunch of bubbles. Again, they make a plastic tool for this. It's a great tool. I have one, but a butter knife will work. And as long as you don't go all crazy, you're not going to damage your jars. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just check my headspace on each one of these to make sure I'm right about where I need to be. This one is perfect, and this one looks pretty perfect. This one could use a tad more. Alright, and this one could use just a tad more. And this one could use a tad more. Alright. Alright, so now all of our jars have the brine in them. If you have a little piece of pickles sticking up out of the brine here, that's fine. These are going to cook down and get soft over time. They're going to be just fine. So don't worry about that. I'm just going to take a towel and go over all of these rims and make sure that they're clean. You don't want anything to get in between your lid and your ring. So now all we do is we place a lid on and then we put our ring on. And we're just going to do that for each one of these. Just so you know, you don't have to preheat your lids. A lot of people say, oh, you got to warm them up in a pan of simmering water so they're sealed. You haven't had to do that since like the 1960s. Ball no longer recommends that. It hasn't been the case for a long time. So I'm going to go ahead and move this brine out of my way, and then we'll get this canner set up. Okay, so all I'm going to do is put some hot water in my canner. You can start with cold water, but you'll have to heat it a little. These jars are hot from the brine, or at least warm. So what I like to do is just get the 1 cup of water in here, and then we're just going to set our jars down in here. And I have my towel in here on the bottom. So I'll show you here. So you can see I just have my towel down there on the bottom that these jars are all sitting on. And I just sit them down in here. And now we'll go ahead, I can turn on my flame. I'll turn on the right burner. Okay, and now I'll just go ahead and top the rest of this canner off with water until we're, I don't know, ½ inch or an inch or so above the jars so that they're completely submerged. I'll just mention one other thing here real quick. You want your lids just like we tighten them with a couple fingers tight. You don't want them like super tight. Don't over tighten them. Just good and snug is all you really need to do. So here's my jars down in here. They're covered with water, kind of hot water. And now I'm just going to let these come to a boil. And then all your recipes are going to tell you your processing times. So this recipe is really for quarts, but you can always process at the quart time and be safe in pints. But if it gives you a pint time and not a quart time, you probably just want to go ahead and do it in pints. So this says that we're going to process for 5 minutes quarts. Process pints for 5 minutes or quarts for 10 minutes. So we just got to bring this water to a good rolling boil and then let them boil for 5 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and put my little garage sale lid on here, and then I'll be back when this is boiling. Alright, so now we're at a good rolling boil here, as you can see. So I'm just going to go ahead and set my timer for 5 minutes. And I'll be back when the timer goes off, and we'll get these jars out of here, and I'll show you how I do that without a big fancy jar lifter tool thing. Alright, so we are done. I'm going to go ahead and just remove the lid, kill the fire. And our jars are all down in there, as you can see. And so what I'm going to do is just let this cool for a few minutes. and then we'll get these jars out of here. Just give it a few minutes to simmer down just a bit. Alright, so now we've given it a few minutes to simmer down. So we're going to go ahead and get these jars out. And what I'm going to do is just come in here with my ladle and start getting this hot water out. Carefully, this is really hot water. You don't want to just let your jar sit in the water until it cools all the way down to where you can reach in, because there is something called flat sour, which is a bacteria that's really harmless to you. It can survive the canning process, and it will make the food taste really nasty. So you don't want to just let your jars sit at that lukewarm temperature. You really want to get them cooling down in a relatively short time frame. You of course don't want to cool them too fast, or you can get thermal shock and have broken jars. Okay, that's good enough. So now we're just going to carefully reach in with a pot holder and grab a jar. Pull them out, and I'm going to sit them here on a towel. You don't want to sit them right on the countertop, because you don't want them to get thermal shock by cooling too quick on the bottom there. Sometimes your pot holder starts to get wet, just grab another one. Oh, see, I dropped that one in the water. Grab another one here. We have pickles. I did, after I put those other jars in, I took some of my stems and pieces and put them in another jar here. Just because I kind of like that. And you don't waste them that way. But you can see these look like wonderful pickles. See how the mixture all turned green after processing, even though it was kind of reddish before. So we'll let these cool, and they'll ping as they cool and seal up, and then we'll have pickles. So what you'll want to do is just let these sit like overnight, and then take the rings off after everything's pinged. One doesn't seal. You can reprocess it, or you can stick it in the fridge. But you probably want to wait a couple of weeks to eat these, to let all the juices really soak into them real good. So, even without processing in this acidic brine, they will last a long, long time in the refrigerator. So, that's it. It's time, your frugal prepper. Go try canning some pickles. It's kind of fun. As you can see, to kind of start canning, you don't need to spend a lot of money on special canners and tools and all that kind of stuff. You can do it with a stock pot and some towels and just a minimal amount of equipment. I'll talk to y'all later. Everybody, stay happy and frugal out there.